Hello again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher. Welcome back to Luxurious Studio G. And this is the third part of a multi-part series on the little 618 model, 6-inch Atlas Craftsman lathe. And I hope you watched the earlier videos, number 994 and 995, and I'll flash those pictures on the screen right now, and maybe put links in the description if I can remember. Alright, in the earlier videos, I spent one whole video just evaluating the machine to talk about it, the condition of it, and so on. Can I get on the right side here? And in number 995, which was part 2, I talked about setting it up, and I started to disassemble it and so on. And now in this video, I'm continuing with the disassembly and the cleaning and the derusting and all of that fun stuff. And I'm cutting it short, so I'm not showing everything, so it isn't too long for you, although it's long enough as it is. But let me start here by showing you some of my cleaning operations, and let me take those items out of the derusting solution and see if I made any progress on them at all. So let's begin. I have had the banjo and the gears and the end of the lead screw soaking in solvent overnight, and I've brushed it, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to pull that out in a minute, but I still have to deal with the lead screw itself, getting that cleaned and derusted. But that solvent really cleaned up the gears nicely. Well, the gears on the banjo really cleaned up beautifully. Remember, they're made of Zamac and they're in very good condition. And that solvent that I use, it's a mystery solvent. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but boy, did it do a job. And these gears I cleaned the other day, and they are quite good as well. I'm not so sure I showed this view in the other video, so it might be a repeat. But anyway, now with all of the gears off, I had a chance to clean it up real well, and the paint is remarkably good under there. So it's actually ready to reassemble. And yes, I know I need a new V-belt. I'm going to get a trashing over that, but not for now. And this little bracket here, of course, clamps onto the bed, and on this pin swings the gear cover that I mentioned in the last video. And now with the lead screw gone and the rack, this is the rack. You all know what the rack is. Quite long, and there is a part number on it. I've already cleaned it quite well, and it is held on right under here. Really, you can't see it when it's mounted, but there are 2 pins, one on each end, and then this is really thin. I don't know what the pitch is. And then there are 6 tiny screws, I think they're number 6s, or maybe even number 5s, holding it on. And that'll go back on, well, when I reassemble it, if I don't lose the screws. But now I got a good chance here to wire brush this and clean this whole area here, and I'm sure that's never been off. This is the bearing for the end of the lead screw, and it mounts right here, as you know, so that's all cleaned up. And by the way, that oil hole was totally plugged, so when I cleaned it with an 1/8 inch drill bit, it was just totally hardened. But anyway, look at how sturdy this is. There's no way that would break. Now I'm going to tell you something that no one else in the world has ever told you, but this is the bearing off of a 10-inch lathe, or maybe even a 12-inch Atlas, I'm not sure. You can see they had different size lead screws. Am I telling you too much? But when I turn this over, I want to show you something. Look at how, this is die-cast Zamac, look at how weak that is. Wouldn't that break? Do you know why it is so weak? Is it just because of shrinkage? Think about it for a minute. No, this is a breakaway bearing, so that if you ran the power feed, the carriage, into the chuck or something like that, this would break. In other words, it's disposable, and that's why I have an extra one. It's disposable. It's kind of like instead of having a shear pin on the other end of the lead screw or the clutch like the 12-inch, this was designed specifically to break. Put it in the comments if you already knew that. and that's free of charge. Now that I am mentally declined, I don't know if I talked about this yesterday in the last video, but this is the thread chasing dial, and boy was this little gear clogged. It's very fine, but that's all cleaned up and ready to mount, and that mounts on the side of the carriage, but I have not done anything yet with the tailstock, and it needs a really good cleaning, and it's going to get it. Always protect your bed and your ways with a piece of wood. Never set anything metal on there. Don't use it as a shelf. But anyway, here's the entire carriage assembly. I have done nothing with it. In fact, I was just thinking, I believe I will make a standalone video just on taking this apart and cleaning it up, because it is dirty and it's going to take a long time, and I think it would be of great interest to many of you. So that will be in another video. And is it dirty? And no, I did not forget about these parts setting overnight in the industrial rust inhibitor, or should I say eliminator. Really a good product. So the first, I stuck this feed reverse lever in there because the knob was rusty. Everything else was okay. And by the way, these two gears on the reversing mechanism here, this is the feed reversing lever and gears, they aren't terribly good. That's why you should always put this in neutral when you are not actually using it. So I removed the rust on the knob here, so let me wipe that off and I'll be right back to see if it did any good. Well, that cleaned up pretty well, but I just put it on the wire brush, and I think that's what actually took the rust off, and it's still not down to bare metal, but it's good enough for who it's for. But if you examine this, you'll see that the little rod here is bent. What am I going to do about that? Nothing, because it still works. So that part is done. Do you recall that I did not want to put the ball bearing live center into the rust eliminator here, so I positioned it such that only the shank was being derusted. So this still needs to be derusted here, but let me wipe that off here and see what it looks like. I think it's still going to need some emery cloth probably. Wow, actually it did an admirable job. You can see where the rust eliminator didn't reach, so I'll clean that with emery cloth, but that, again, that looks great. But I will put this in the lathe, probably downstairs, and just clean this with emery cloth, because I don't want any liquids in here besides oil, because it's still pretty rough as is, and the point isn't the best either, but it's usable. Okay, here's all of the other parts that were in the rust eliminator. Remember how bad this chuck was, and I still may throw it away, and it's got that black oxide, but most of the rust appears to be off of it, and I'll talk more about that later. But the centers and the tool post and these other things here all look pretty good, but of course they have to be wiped and a little bit more worked, a little elbow grease on them yet, and then some oil so they do not get that flash rust. This is the knob from the tailstock, and I believe that this part is Zamac, but this was real rusty, and I cleaned up nice. Now I'm going to show you all this stuff in a few minutes after I clean it a little bit better off camera, and some other centers and different parts here that I'm not too concerned about. But the 4-jaw chuck that I put in there really cleaned up nice, and I think it's going to be great after I spend a little time with it. And I want to make sure I blow off all of that material and get it dried off, and then I'll put it on the spindle and actually run it and clean it with emery cloth. And I won't bore you with that. You would hate that, because I hate doing it. But I have not done anything with the 3-jaw chuck, which is extremely rusty, and to be honest with you, I think I'm going to save this for a standalone video, because I intend to take it apart and take the scroll out of there and all of that stuff. If you've never had a 3-jaw apart, you may like that. However, I've done that in other videos, but that will take a lot of time, so I'm setting that aside for now, and I'll be back in a few minutes after I get all of this stuff dried off and cleaned up, and let's see what it looks like. Alright, this is the table of my bandsaw, and I've cleaned it off, and it's flat, and it's nice, and it's true, and this is 360 wet or dry. Why am I showing you this, you're thinking? So these are the jaws from the 4-jaw chuck, and I did not put them into the rust eliminator because they aren't all that bad, but the minor corrosion and dirt and filth and everything I took off simply by doing this and taking long strokes and at different angles, and they really cleaned up nicely, and they will be ready to install in the four-jaw chuck in a while. Well, I cleaned all these parts on the wire wheel, and you might be saying, well, you should have just used the wire wheel in the beginning, dispense with the liquids, and actually you are correct for real light rust. You might just as well go to the wire brush. And by the way, this is not Zamek. I just checked it with a magnet. That's for the tailstock again. And there's the tool post. That cleaned up real nicely, didn't it? And the tool post rings. And, you know, these centers, they cleaned up fairly well, and I have to oil everything real well momentarily here. But there's no way to hold this in order to clean it with emery cloth. So, other than to hold it in the spindle, and then you can only clean up the end like that. So, actually it's good enough though. I'll clean that up with Scotch-Brite, and then I'm done. All right, now off camera, I'm going to tackle the four-jaw here and see what it looks like. See you in an hour. All right, I dried this off, I blew it off real well, and now again with this fine abrasive, starting to clean up nicely. I won't bore you with the rest. This is 320 grit paper, cloth. Not done, but I'll do it off camera. A little safety note here. Now, I cut a narrow strip off of that piece you just saw, and the whole idea is I want to go back here and catch a little of the hub. But I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to not wrap this around your fingers when you do that, because if it grabs, it could pull the end of your finger right off. And I'm not kidding. Remember that for the rest of your life. So how should you hold it, you ask? Simply like this, with two fingers on each end, and if it grabs, it'll pull it out of your fingers real easily. Wow, did that ever clean up nicely? I mean, it's not perfect, because if there's any pitting or bad staining, it's not going to come out. So you don't even worry about that. But it cleaned up, I think, beautifully. So I'm going to take it off of the machine now and go over to the bench and oil it up a little bit, and I'm going to install the jaws, and then I'll show it to you again. You don't need to see that. And I now realize that they have the slots numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. I could not see that because of the rust. It is so hard to film shiny things. Now, when I was up at Mitutoyo, he explained some of that to me. But now everything has been oiled lately. I just used some 3-in-1 oil. Not too much, because any extra oil is going to get slung out when you put it on the machine, and you're going to wear a stripe up your left shoulder. So remember, I cleaned these and they're oiled. I could barely get them out the other day when I disassembled that, but look at how smoothly and nicely those jaws fit. Now, I can't find numbers on the jaws, but there are numbers on here, but I guess it doesn't matter. So now I truly will assemble it. Okay, there it is, finished. It really looks great, actually. I was even thinking about painting the rough part inside, but no sense getting carried away. Again, there's a little bit of staining on it that will never come out, but remember, in a follow-up video someplace along the line, I will tackle the 3-jaw, but I don't believe it'll ever clean up as nicely as this one. This is just in rough condition, but that'll be in another video. And there it is, mounted on the spindle. I love it, but it will be slinging oil for a while. I think the whole world knows this, but always put a board under your chuck when you take it off, for 2 reasons. One, you don't want to smash your fingers between the chuck and the lathe bed, and number 2, it's always going to get away from you. So you're protecting the bed, and it can just drop onto the board if it has to. One more thing while I got the camera set up. The back gear lever was rather rusty, so that is something that I cleaned up as well. And it's just a press fit into this Zamak fitting here. I thought that it actually was threaded in there, but it's not. So I'll just tap it into submission here with my brass hammer. And if that comes loose, I may need some Loctite. So that's the back gear lever on a 6-inch Atlas. About 20 minutes ago, I lied to you when I said there's no way to hold a tapered center because I want to polish these up a little bit with some fine emery cloth. But I figured out a way of doing it. Actually, it's pretty obvious, I guess. But the very end here is cylindrical. It is not tapered. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm gripping that little end in the 3-jaw chuck. And in the ball bearing center here, I have a small oil light bearing grip. And I'll bring the tailstock up into the 60-degree center, at which time I'm ready to polish away to my heart's content. So what do you think of that idea? Okay, these centers cleaned up pretty good. They're not great because there's pitting, but they'll work. They're fine. They're good enough for who it's for. All right, what about this? I do want to get this polished up. Remember, I did derust this in the pretend evaporust. So I will chuck it right here, right like that. And there is a center hole on this end. So let me install it like this. Bring the center up. Lock it. And now it is ready to polish. And so on. It needs a little bit more, but I won't show that. So that's my solution. And as far as cleaning the point end, I'll wait until this is, well, I can reverse it in the chuck and hold it by this and polish the point a little bit if it needs it. You know what? I couldn't sleep at all last night trying to figure out how I was going to polish and clean the lead screw from the 6-inch Atlas. So I'm here on the 12-inch Atlas in the basement right now and get a gander at what I'm doing here. The unthreaded end, the bearing end, the tailstock end of the lead screw is in the 3-jaw chuck, and then the gear cluster, the banjo and everything, this end has a center hole, so I'm holding it with the center, and the banjo is resting up against the compound here, so it can't turn, and it appears to be a very doable, although it looks kind of scary, doesn't it? A doable operation is what I meant to say. So I'm going to do several things off camera. I'm going to use a brass brush to clean the threads because it's pretty bad, and then I'm going to use some 500 grit paper on the whole thing. If there are any nicks or anything, I will gently file it. But I think between what I just told you there, it might take care of it. And one other thing I want to show you here, but don't try it at home. So this is just a trial run. This is quite a fine thread, you know. So after I do all the other operations that I just explained, I'm going to take some white twine, turn the machine on, and notice how I'm holding it. Do not, I repeat, do not wrap that around your fingers like that. You're just asking for trouble. And you know what? Roger Taylor out in California talked about using abrasives on a lathe and some of the dangers. But if you take a look now, this turns pretty nice, doesn't it? So that's doable. And I think I'll slow the speed down for what I'm going to do now, but watch this if you will. See the debris coming out of the thread? So I'll do that again in the final step before I oil it. So that's my MO here for refurbishing the lead screw on the 6-inch lathe. What do you think of that? Leave a comment. Is it too dangerous? Is it foolish? Is this going to get away on me and crash and destroy everything and make me go upstairs and pout and eat blackberry jam on an English muffin like Winston Churchill did when he was in one of his black moods? Well, I'm almost out of twine, but I will endeavor to do my best with what I do have. Alright, I won't show anymore. It's too good to be true. It's really turning out nice. I know you cannot tell from the photograph or the video here, but I'm done. Just a little bit of oil on it and it'll be ready to install in about 2 different chapters from now. For those of you that watched the previous chapter, remember when I was giving the demonstration with the dial indicator and I was having a little trouble engaging the half nut lever? Well, the whole reason was that the lead screw was so packed with hardened grease and debris, the half nut would not engage properly, so I had to use Randy Richards' carbide tip scriber here, and I ran this over. It just followed the thread, and this dark, I just cleaned it off, but this dark brown matter came out of the thread. So now the thread is clean using this and the twine, and I almost used up the whole ball of twine, but I guess I got a little bit left. Well, that's just about enough fun for today. It's a rather long video, so I'll wrap it up, and in the next episode I will be working on the tailstock and the carriage, which is quite a large job, so be sure and tune in to that, and make sure you have watched the previous videos, and please give me a thumbs up. I think that helps the channel, and leave a comment, even if you just put a smiley face or something silly on that. That would also help me a lot. Now there's a bunch of still pictures to follow if you can take it, and I'll see you in the next video. So long for now.